Jeffries.
I thank the distinguished gentlelady from Ohio, Representative Beatty, my good friend, for those very kind words, and of course for your tremendous leadership in anchoring and shepherding us here this evening in the same manner that you have done since your arrival here in the House of Representatives. Always eloquent, erudite, and effervescent, and we appreciate that unique and tremendous combination of skill and ability that you bring to the people that you represent so ably in Columbus, Ohio, and of course really on behalf of America as you stand here anchoring this Congressional Black Caucus Special Order Hour. And I look forward to continuing to work together throughout the year as we endeavor to speak truth to power here on the floor of the House of Representatives and articulate issues of significance and importance to African Americans in the United States of America and to all of America. Earlier today, I made the observation, this is the first day of Black History Month. Essentially, Black history is American history. They are forever intertwined. And that's why the subject matter of this special order is of particular importance. Dr. King once made the observation that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I think what Dr. King was saying is that in this world you've got some good folks and you've got some bad actors. But in order for justice to prevail, what you essentially need is a fair amount of the good folks to come together, sacrifice, work hard, dedicate themselves to the cause of social change, and at the end of the day, justice will prevail. But make no mistake that in the United States of America, of course, it's been a long and complicated march. We certainly have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. During the founding of the Republic back in 1776, in the DNA of this great country was embedded the principles of liberty and justice for all. It was a great document and a great start. Embedded in the DNA of this country, fairness, equality, opportunity for everyone, but there was a genetic defect called chattel slavery that was also attendant to our birth. And if you're going to have any discussion about where we are in America today, you've got to recognize there was a genetic defect that has impacted the arc of the African American community here in America and the American story. And that genetic defect of chattel slavery stayed with us, of course, until the war ended in 1865. Millions of African American slaves subjugated, one of the worst crimes ever perpetrated in the history of humanity. Finally ended in 1865 with the adoption of the 13th Amendment. And then, of course, we know that the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment followed equal protection under the law for everyone. 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, designed to guarantee the right to vote. So-called Reconstruction period lasts until the middle of the 1870s, but is largely abandoned thereafter. And then African Americans, of course, were given a raw, bad deal. How can you cure the genetic defect of chattel slavery with 3 constitutional amendments without ever really forcefully implementing them, and within a decade or so, abandoning the principles inherent in those constitutional amendments, and in place, we received the black codes, Jim Crow, segregation, and an intense lynching campaign unleashed on African Americans in the South, in the Midwest, in the Far West, and other parts of the United States of America. And so we went from chattel slavery, brief period of Reconstruction, then you give us Jim Crow. And so we dealt with Jim Crow, which was, at least in principle, abolished on paper when the Supreme Court makes the decision in Brown v. Board of Education that separate but equal was just a farce. It was a joke. It wasn't real. So the Supreme Court exposes that, but then says, go ahead and implement it with all deliberate speed, which basically meant don't really implement it with any urgency, any immediacy, any impactful fashion. Just take your time and do it at your own pace. And so as we're trying to deal with Jim Crow, then you have, of course, Dr. King and leaders of the civil rights movement, John Lewis, who Congresswoman Beatty and I are so privileged to serve with, A. Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, James Farmer, so many others. And the civil rights movement deals with the lingering effects of our original genetic defect of chattel slavery, replaced by Jim Crow. And then in the 60s, we get the 64 Civil Rights Act, the 65 Voting Rights Act, the 68 Fair Housing Act, Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty, and efforts to try to finally correct the injustices that have been race-based here in America. And like Reconstruction, which lasted for a little over a decade, we get this period of dramatic social change, mainly in the early and mid-1960s, that's quickly abandoned, taken advantage of by Richard Nixon in 1968 with the Southern strategy, white backlash, particularly in the Deep South, compounded in 1971 when President Richard Nixon makes the statement that drug abuse is public enemy number one. And essentially, the war on drugs ushered in an era of mass incarceration. So when President Nixon makes that statement, there were less than 350,000 people incarcerated in America. Today, 40 plus years later, after the war on drugs, so-called, was started, 2.3 million people, more than 1 million African-American men, disproportionately and adversely impacting communities of color, and as has been mentioned earlier, incarcerate more people in America than any other country in the world. A country where we over-incarcerate and under-educate. And so when we talk about this journey, and we've made a lot of progress in America, African Americans as a collective community really haven't been given any room to breathe. Because we've gone from chattel slavery, the original birth defect in this great republic, to Jim Crow, to mass incarceration, with brief periods of Reconstruction and the Civil Rights era mixed in between. And you wonder why we're in the situation that we are in right now. We've made a lot of progress. Obviously, the fact that Barack Obama is sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is a significant development. But as Dr. King says, he talked about an arc, which means that similar to what Abraham Lincoln once said, we have to continue a march toward a more perfect union. And the Congressional Black Caucus, with leadership from dynamic representatives like Joyce Beatty, have put forth a series of things to benefit not just the African American community, but all communities, to help bring the promise in democracy to life. And with that, I yield back to my good